So here we are, an alumni of the Infact School from 2018, Vanessa Kessler, German origin, residing in Australia, a counselor and psychotherapist. And so I got a hold of Vanessa the other day when she was visiting in Europe. So we had decent times to talk, and she was so kind to be willing to talk about what has happened to her after Infact and how it's affecting her and what she's doing today in the field of food addiction and other. So welcome, Vanessa. Please just tell us a little bit about yourself. Let's start with your story a little bit. How about that?
Yes, thank you. I just want to first say thank you for having me as well. It was so nice to get back in touch. And as Esther said, right, like it's sometimes difficult being in Australia to find the right time zones, but now I'm in Germany, it's much easier. So my story is that I'm a food addict, and I have had, I believe, food addiction my whole life. Like I cannot remember a time when I didn't have it. So my theory, now that I've done so much studying on this, is that I acquired it either at birth or even before, like pre-birth, so very early on. And I've had it my whole life, and it just progressed and progressed. So I've had struggles with overeating like forever. And as a child, of course, you don't think about it, you just kind of do it. And it was really when I came into my early teenage years when somebody talked about my body being too big, or, like you should watch what you eat. It sort of started off as, an eating disorder kind of started developing in parallel, but the underlying food addiction was always there, and I was essentially binging or overeating on a daily basis. And I remember that in my 30s, when I broke up with a relationship, a very significant relationship, and then made a lot of changes. Like I changed jobs and countries, and I did everything at once, and it really escalated then. And that's when I found recovery, and I went to initially I went to Overeaters Anonymous. I actually went to a counselor first, and this counselor eventually sent me to Overeaters Anonymous, where I spent a good 5 years trying to recover and doing all the suggested things. I worked the steps a lot. I did all the step work, all the outreach, all the meetings. The only thing I was still struggling with was the food, because the instructions were sort of like, 3 moderate meals, and I wasn't eating any sugar, I wasn't eating any flour, and I wasn't eating any of my binge foods. But I then realized I was completely addicted to volume. And so I was eating huge amounts of fruit and vegetables and all kinds of things, in my Overeaters Anonymous time, until after 5 years of very intensive OA, I was at a really rock bottom. I thought I was going to go insane about all this food madness, and how do I eat and what do I eat? And I came across a sponsor in OA, but she was, without really knowing, I think she was kind of working an OA HOW program, which is very prescriptive. And gave me a weighed and measured food plan, and I was like, it changed my whole world. It was amazing. So since then I've been abstinent. So I've now been abstinent for 9 years, just under 9 years. And my obsession is gone, and I just follow the food plan, and I continue to go to a different food fellowship. And I continue to, am involved in the 12 steps in other ways. And I've also been ever since early recovery, I studied counselling and coaching, and have supported clients for, I think, about 7 years now. So and somewhere in that I found Infact, right? So in 2018 I found Infact and did this training with you, which was wonderful.
Wow, thank you, Vanessa. That was the very descriptive to hear, and I'm sorry to say, I think many food addicts really do need to get an abstinence plan instead of trying to acknowledge what their trigger food or what they should do. But and obviously you did. I know I did. Okay, so tell me, what was your experience of doing the Infact training, and what kind of did that change for you, maybe personally, maybe professionally?
Yeah. So my professional trajectory started with I did sort of like a diploma in counselling, right? And so I started off doing counselling when I was in early recovery. So, 2 or 3 years in, I already started doing a little bit of counseling, not very much. And then I actually trained as a coach. And when I did Infact, by that time, I had already set up and was working as a coach, sort of like a recovery coach. I was essentially supporting people with food addiction in a very practical way. When I did Infact, it was like a real kind of consolidation of that work, because it was the first time that I found a place that actually offers professional and certified food addiction counseling or food addiction support, which to this day I don't think you can find it anywhere else, and if you do, then usually it turns out to be something completely different, like nutritional or something sort of very different than what it says on the label. So when I did Infact, it just gave me a lot of reassurance that I'm on the right track here, supporting people with this condition called food addiction, because it is a thing, even though it's not recognized as a thing in the DSM-5 yet. And it gave me a network to people globally, and there's been a bit of collaboration since then. It got me connected with the Food Addiction Institute, for example, and for some time I was quite involved with the Food Addiction Institute as a board member. Yeah, it was just a really good consolidation of my skills, and it's sort of like a very, what's the word, like a very structured way of guiding people through, what is the treatment that people need initially when they come into recovery. Yeah, it's a great program.
Well, thank you for saying that, Vanessa. I'm glad to hear that as the creator of it. And of course, we do have a lot of specialists in the field. This is not something that is beginning right, like yesterday. It's been conducted. These kind of treatments have been done for more than 40 years now. Not by so many, but where it's done, that's where pretty much what we base our teachings on. So yeah, and you were really an active board member at the Food Addiction Institute. I do remember that. It was there was some complication in getting the times together, accommodating you and us and all of it, but that was something to be grateful for you as well. So just wanted to say, Vanessa, that what I always admired about you was your dedication and passion for this, for the food addiction, and becoming a food addiction professional for sure. So what happened after the Infact School, more so for you, do you think? I know you went into a university and did some more studies, and tell us more about that.
That's right. So I was working away, being a food addiction. My business at the time was called Food Freedom Coaching, and so it was very much focused on the coaching, initially. And then I recognized that so I need to step back and say what seems to be transpiring about my work is that it always is very much in parallel to my own healing journey, right? And so I started off obviously coming into recovery, going into all the sort of practical matters, like, what do you need for food addiction recovery? You need the food plan, you need the support, you need all of these practical things. So I had all of that installed in my life. And the more I had that, and I was constantly seeking what they call in the big book outside help, right? So I was always in some form of therapy. And as that process deepened and I learned a lot more about, the nature of the addiction and my own emotional and inner worlds, and where the addiction essentially came from, and what some of the dysfunctionalities were in my childhood and the challenging experiences and so on, I kind of realized with my clients as well that there was a point where, you go through the practical matters of food addiction recovery, and then there is a point where all the emotions come up, and then how do you work with that, right? There is a beginning stage where, and that's a huge amount of work, right? It's a huge amount of work. It's so deep, but it's like you've got to help the client to understand their emotions and to deal with their emotions, to support them emotionally. But once they get a hang of that, which in itself could take quite a while of intensive work, there's more, and it goes deeper, right? And so I found that I needed to equip myself to support my clients in that way, not only based on my own understanding of therapy, which I had from my lived experience, but I needed some credentials, and I needed to also feed my passion about, really understanding all of this stuff. So I decided to eventually do a master's in counseling. And so I've just finished that. I've been slaving away on it for 3 years part-time while I'm, seeing clients. And I've also got a part-time job as well. So that's been invaluable. It's been hugely invaluable, because I find that if you want to do that deeper work, and nowadays, it's I do addiction and complex trauma essentially. If you want to do that sort of work, you need those credentials, and you need a deeper understanding of trauma, for example, or some of those, attachment theory, those types of very important concepts. And you need to be able to support people in an ethical way. You need to be integrated into associations, like the Australian Counselling Association. In my case, you need to have all kinds of different types of supervision. So there is a lot that is needed, and I needed to do the master's for that reason, plus for my own curiosity and my own learning, which kind of all fed in together. And I can only recommend doing that sort of thing, because it's a hugely invaluable thing. I know that, well, I guess that a lot of people come into Infact already with those types of skills, maybe, right? So I sort of did it almost backwards, right? I sort of came in from a completely different line of work, and I'm, sort of acquired the more solid kind of qualifications over time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think actually, people come into Infact from both places. They have already a professional background in being physicians, nurses, dietitians. We've had, different health and social workers and people from all those different professions. And then the Infact School is more like an add-on onto their knowledge, so that they can help their clients more. But I've noticed with a lot of people that come in, they come also out of interest, and they do want to be in some way involved in helping people, and also knowing more what to do if they have the affliction themselves. So people come in for different reasons, for sure. So you went all the way and got a master in counseling and psychotherapy, I know, and so to deepen your abilities in work. And I know I needed to do something similar as well. As I went into the work, I think we kind of realize that we need some professional backgrounds in order to do the deeper work. So you talk about the emotions, and I actually so agree with you. This is like, maybe we can talk more about, together about what the disease of food addiction really is. It is, of course, a biological thing, and then it is a mental, spiritual thing. It is and emotional. So how do you define the difference and the differences in what we need to do with clients for that?
It's like it's such a complex disease, right? Sometimes I just call it a medical condition with my clients, because it it seems like the term medical condition rings more true for people than disease, because disease has some sort of I don't know, some kind of a negative connotation for people, right? I mean, I know we call it disease from the 12 steps, and it makes complete sense, right? And it's defined as that too by the American Psychiatric Association. So what I'd normally say to people who come in from scratch and they know nothing about food addiction, they just think they just know they've got it. Usually this is what happens. They come and they know they've got it, they really identify, but they're like, is this real? There's so much weird information out there, I don't understand this. So then I sort of do a fair bit of education, to start with, depending on where they're at. And I just explained that, yes, it's a medical condition, and there are certain things that happen in the brain, and they usually start very early. And so it's like that. And so we've got to take certain measures in a medical sense to just make sure that we can live with this, right? That we can thrive with this, that we can recover from this. And what's part of this is like almost like a medical regimen, like a medical treatment. Like, if you go to a doctor for and they tell you you've got cancer, they will suggest a certain treatment, and you will most likely follow that treatment. And so it's like that with food addiction. It's a medical condition, and I often talk to clients about that. And over time, there's a lot of shame reduction for clients with that, because they realize, okay, it is a real thing. And it would be very helpful if the DSM people would also recognize that, because it would really support clients in knowing that this is a thing, and that they're not crazy, and that they can just get this support from professionals and also from peer groups. So to go back to your question, that's the first thing I would do, is to kind of set up that treatment. If they haven't done anything else before, sometimes I also get people who come in there and already in a 12-step group, for example, and then things are a bit different, because they usually have specific goals in terms of they want to go deeper into something, or learn or recap about their recovery, whatever it may be. And so over time, we usually then start working on, okay, so what would be your food plan? What would that look like for you? What are your certain bottom lines? Obviously then I make the sort of suggestions around no sugar, no flour, no trigger foods. We work out what are your trigger foods, what are your trigger kind of food behaviors, what about volume? And we set that sort of stuff up, and then we would go into, what are your triggers, and how can we support you in relapse prevention, and first of all, gaining more awareness of your triggers and those situations and why they are triggers, and then how can we make a bit of a plan for you to make sure that you can, navigate those things better. I always suggest peer groups, peer support. It's so important. However, I must say that a lot of people don't go there. They don't want to go there. They don't want to go to 12-step groups. So I suggest other groups. So, there are things like Smart Recovery. I try, whatever there is, I just say you need support. Like I do try to say that. And I see in clients that the ones that get that sort of support beyond me are the ones that are doing better than the ones that don't.
So you don't do groups yourself as of yet,
Not at the moment, but that's going to be a next step for me.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to do I'm going to start some groups next year.
Mm-hmm.
But that's going to be a little bit more focused on the deeper work already, the
Yes.
internal family systems kind of approach, which I can talk about a little bit later. But yeah, what happens then is, already from the start, emotions will be coming up. And so I explain, again, there's a fair bit of education around why do they come up and what are emotions and why is it that when we were in addiction they didn't come up so much and now it seems like they are. And it's very new for people to then realize and recognize that, oh, okay, so part of my addiction was to push down some of those emotions, and that's one of the functions that addiction has. And so we kind of learn a fair bit about emotions and we explore them together, and I get them to check in emotionally with themselves on a more regular basis, and put together a toolbox as to, how can I, deal with my emotions in a different way when I'm not wanting to go back into the food. So that in itself is a huge amount of work, right? So that's kind of where it starts. And then I find eventually it goes into trauma work. It just ends up going into trauma work because what often happens is people recognize that some things might prevent them from sticking to their food plans, from dealing with their emotions, or some things always keep coming up, or, whatever it is. And then we recognize that, okay, so there are some deeper triggers. So what's going on here? And that's when the deeper work usually starts.
Yeah. So tell me, when you start doing more of the deeper work, what are your thoughts about doing that in early recovery? Because we have there is always the danger zone when we rock the boat. The abstinence part of the disease kind of gets really rocketed.
Yeah.
So what's your experience with that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've been humbled by clients. Like, I learn a lot from my clients because when I first came into this work, I had a quite a strong coaching approach, which was like, we do it this way, right?
Yes.
Now I'm kind of leaning more towards, so actually everybody's a bit different and it really depends, right? So I do have clients who come in who are not yet sober or abstinent, because I do food addiction. I also do other addictions. And it's almost like we need to sometimes do a bit of deeper work while we're in parallel trying to sort of, do the,
Yes.
the sort of coaching stuff, the sort of more practical, right? Okay, how am I going to stay sober when I'm going to this wedding or whatever it is? So it's difficult. There's no sort of alignment. I certainly have heard from clients and have also had that experience myself, that if you go into some of those food programs, the how programs, the ones that are more strict, like for example, Food Addicts and Recovery Anonymous, there are many different ones, right? But a lot of them have rules that say you can't share unless you've had 90 days of sobriety. And so what then happens is that those people who've maybe had a fair bit of trauma in their lives and they can't get at abstinence, they can never share and actually integrate into that program, and they're ashamed because they can't get there. And so the shame is actually one of the reasons why they've got addiction in the first place, in a very sort of developmental early attachment context. And so you can't do that either. So you've got to find a way of working with the client to see what it is they need in that moment. So sometimes deeper work has to happen from the start. Absolutely. It almost needs to go in parallel.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear you say that, because that's my experience as well. But I also realized that much of the trauma can be kind of tabled. You can be recognized, And like with something like integrational, what's the English word for the integrative family systems work, EMDR work. I do trauma with hypnotherapy parts and regression. It's all kind of similar kind of work.
Yes.
That is very mildly going in there and getting the inner parts of the client kind of saved, to kind of save them so that they can continue. And I think that, yeah, so that kind of work, I think, is very beneficial and needed as we go into being abstinent from our drugs that sedate the emotional part of us. And if we don't have the qualifications to meet a client there where it needs to be met, or they, then then something may be missing. And so I totally support you in your findings with this, for sure. And that's where, like, young or people that wouldn't have that qualification would need to have people that they could refer to. So who can do that kind of work with the client if I cannot, and now we know you can.
That's right. And I must admit that it's as I learned that in my own healing journey, that I was able to get that qualification. And it's almost like, like I said, my own healing is so significant. The lived experience is so significant in pushing me forward to discover that, right? Because I discovered that, there's a huge limitation in just doing the coaching, because I get stuck, my clients get stuck, like I get stuck in my personal recovery. So I've experienced that I need what's next. How do we go deeper? There is something there, right? And so, absolutely, we need to be able to support our clients, or otherwise refer. But the trouble is with referring, and I had that experience in the beginning. If I would refer to, say, a psychologist or whatever, right, because I wasn't at the time qualified to do the deeper work, they don't understand food addiction. So then this client, this client has to go to this professional who doesn't understand food addiction, even though I try to explain to that professional what food addiction is, and they might not be very receptive. And then they start thinking about eating disorders, and then it's sort of really sidelines, or it messes up the treatment for the client, which is so unfortunate, which is why we need so much better recognition of food addiction once again. Yes. So it's tricky. It is much better for the client if they have somebody who understands the practical side of the addiction recovery, the treatment for the medical condition, so to speak, and who's then able to take them deeper once they are ready to do that, or whenever they're ready to do it.
Yes. And this is also my experience with other professionals, and gets very tricky. This is why it is so important to gather people together, like what's happened within the students of Infact, for example, that you get professionals that have the understanding and the openness to work with clients. So some of that is already happening. So one factor I do want to talk to you about, which is, of course, the 12-step work, which actually addresses what we're talking about directly, if it is worked. So I know in my work of 17 years almost now as a food addiction professional here in Iceland and around the world, I have found a way as a professional to help person, whether they want to be in a 12-step program or not, to go through the process of the 12 steps, because that's what is really recovery for the disease if you do it. So what's your thought on that, Vanessa?
I mean, the 12 steps for me have been how I got abstinent. It's still my personal fundamental pathway. So if I'm in a crisis, so to speak, for whatever reason, I go right back to the 12 steps. Like it's amazing how it happened. Like I'll give you just a brief example. So last year at some point I had a bit of a shock at some, you know, just a sort of personal experience, a shock experience. And to my surprise, almost, you know, with all the things I've learned and everything, I went to the big book. I took my big book out of my you know, cupboard, and I was like, oh, yeah. And I just stuck with the big book, because that's how I've grown up. I've grown up with the 12 steps, right? So yes, I do believe that the 12 steps are super important. But I also want to say something about the 12 steps, which is, once we get into trauma work, the 12 steps aren't necessarily trauma informed, and that's an issue, like, because the language of the 12 steps is not, unless you go to some of the, you know, fresher fellowships, some of the language of the how programs, you know, even if you read the big book or whatever, all of that literature is very old. And I was always, luckily in my recovery personally, I was always able to just see that, note that, and translate it for myself in a way that works really well for me. So I didn't have that sort of hang up around language. But really, in today's world, you know, a lot of people find that language offensive. They don't want to engage with that sort of language. They also, you know, from a cultural diversity perspective, for example, it's very unacceptable in many ways. Also from a trauma perspective, it can be read as being a bit shaming, right? So it's tricky, because when somebody said trauma, which many of us have had in big ways or others in small ways, it's tricky. So what I often recommend to clients as well is to check out some of the fellowships which deal with trauma. So for example, ACOA, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, I think is the full name.
Yes.
Because they have they have a book which is called the Big Red Book, and they have amazing, very contemporary sort of literature and workbooks and things like that, which clients can do, which, you know, which peers can do. And they, for example, they don't call each other sponsors, they call each other fellow travelers. And so it's a lot more trauma informed. It's less shaming. They've rewritten the 12 steps in a way that is a lot less shaming. And that to me is a wonderful way of working the steps in a trauma informed way that takes into consideration the addiction as well as the trauma. But having said that, I'm not suggesting that anybody can replace ACOA with a food program, for example. You can't, you just got to work both. Like somehow you got to work both. I know it sounds like a lot of work, but it's you know, it's so essential. And just to say the last thing about the 12 steps is, you know, it's the community. It's the community. Like, what would we do without our peers? It's impossible to pay for a counselor every day, to call them like 24/7 if I'm like if I'm relapsing or whatever it is. I need support from peers. There is no other way.
Peer support. Absolutely. Well, Vanessa, I'm not sure if you know, these seem to be really, really good final words, but anything that you would want to add on to for today? Any final words?
Final words, good. So so I recently, not recently, for a while now, I've been following internal family systems, and I've done a fair few bits of trainings. I've not yet got into the level 1 official training because there's a huge wait list, but I still work in an IFS informed way because I've done a fair amount of training. So I do my own IFS therapy as well. So what I've learned in that, and I'm going to offer a group in IFS informed work for just a small amount of clients at this point, just to test it out and see how it goes. But what a really lovely benefit of this modality is not only the trauma work that can go really deep, but even before that is to apply a lens of curiosity and compassion to our addictions. And that is so effective with clients, I found already, in terms of, you know, the thing is, if we call it a medical I call it a medical condition, you know, we call it a disease, right? Which is what it is, right? But to be able to investigate in a curious way and sort of say, what is the purpose of this, you know? And what is this all about? Like I say to my clients, you know, you want to be like a Sherlock Holmes, like you want to approach your recovery and your inner work like a Sherlock Holmes, and just make it a big game and just go, wow, what is this, you know? And be curious, because it's so difficult otherwise to think, oh my God, I've got this disease and now I'm like all sick and I've got to, you know, it's so overwhelming for people, and it's so much more, it creates so much more openness and compassion and willingness to go forward, and courage as well, to be able to look at our addictions and say, wow, what is this? You know, let's look under the hood, kind of thing. You know, let's embrace this and kind of make it a bit of a project. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, an opportunity.
Opportunity, absolutely. I mean, you know, the best things have come out of addiction recovery for me, in terms of, you know, how I live my life today, what I stand for, what my values are. You know, friendships. Yeah,
absolutely. Vanessa, this has been beautiful, and thank you so much for your willingness to do this with us. And we'll send this out to students and maybe some others that are affiliated with our website and our social media. All my best to you, Vanessa.
Thank you. Let me just say, people can contact me too. You can find me on vanessakredler.com. So you'll get my contact details there. So if you've got any questions, just email me.
Well, that sounds good. Thank you for saying that as well. Okay.